Hello, and thank you all for coming. My name is Shannon Samuel. I am the SEL counselor at Manville High School. Today, we will be speaking to you about emotional poverty. The other counselors will also be hopping on. We have Heather Benbrook from Alvin High School, Faye Cooper from Iowa Colony, and Ashley Gully from Shadow Creek. So let's jump right in. You click it. So, what is emotional poverty? And how does this impact your home? So, emotional poverty is any time that a child lacks the emotional capacity or resources to really follow through or process what is actually going on with them. So, this can happen because the brain is not regulated. They're having a hard time with their emotions. So, it's really overwhelming and really intense. They may have a underdeveloped inner self, so their self-confidence may be low. Their bonding and attachment style may be insecure or one of the other ones, so it's not a secure attachment style, or the environment that they're in reinforces that they are less than or not belonging there.
All right, good morning, everyone. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into some basics about emotions. So all emotional wellness is based in safety and belonging. The more a person feels safe and that they belong, the more free they're going to be about sharing their emotional experiences. Emotions are simple. You either move toward or away from something or someone. You know what you like and you know what you don't like. You're either inclined to go towards it or away from it. Emotions are super fast, 200 to 5,000 times faster than thought. So think about your kiddos who are very emotional. Think about how fast those emotions are going through them. It's also hard to change behaviors, but it's easy to change the motivation for the behavior. I want you to think about you as parents, what motivates you to do things, right? It's the same with kids, and it doesn't always have to be tangible. You know, you can just look at what your kid likes. Do they like hugs? Do they like words of affirmation? Do they like physical touch? Those are some of the things that might motivate the behaviors that you're looking for. All right, so more basics about emotions. So let's just think about our first language is emotions. Think about when you're a baby. How does a baby communicate that they're hungry? How does a baby communicate that they're sleepy, that they need attention? They cry, right? And so that's how it is. As we grow, we learn how to communicate using formal language. We don't. That's our first language is emotion, right? As we grow, we don't lose that ability to feel our emotions, but we just have to be able to name our problem in order to change it, right? You cannot change a behavior that you cannot name. All right, so a little more basics about emotions. Have you ever met an angry, compassionate person? Probably not, right? And that's because we can't feel compassion and anger at the same time. Just look at it this way: anger is needed to defend yourself from others, while compassion is needed to connect to others. Go ahead and look at that quote by Rita. Every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists they become the best they can possibly be. As no significant learning and growth can happen without a significant relationship. Okay.
All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the brain because that's where our emotions truly are. We always say like our emotions are in our hearts or whatever, but it's actually in the brain. And they have come up. Dan Siegel is Dr. Dan Siegel actually came up with a hand-brain model to explain what is going on in our brains, and this is something that we have actually taught our kids. They actually get it, and so teaching them this helps them become more mindful when they are dysregulated or they're under a bunch of stress. And yes, kids get stressed too. So we're going to walk through this. I'm not going to make you do it with me or anything like that. But if you want to, go ahead, join me. But if you have your hand out like this, and you put your thumb on the inside and wrap your four fingers around it, this would be a regulated brain. And this is where we want to be. Okay. So when you're thinking about this hand brain model or the hand model of the brain, the front four fingers are going to be your prefrontal cortex. It's right here in the front of your brain. And that is where we do a lot of our rational thought processes, our empathy, those things that take a little bit more cognition. But when we're dysregulated, they call it flipping your lid. I like to move my fingers a little bit because it kind of shows like the misfiring neurotransmitters that are going on there. On the inside, what is exposed after you're dysregulated and you're not in control anymore is that feeling brain. When I talk to the kids about it, I always like to call it the caveman brain, because this is pretty much what they did, right? Cavemen tried to survive. I always do the scenario. A saber-tooth tiger came into their cave, and all of a sudden, what are they going to do? Well, they're in their amygdala right here in the middle part of their brain, and then in the brainstem as well. And they're just trying to survive. So the stress response is ignited. They're either going to fight, they're going to flight, they're going to freeze, or there's another one more recently called fawn as well. And so all of that is housed here. And so when we're in our emotional or our feeling brain, caveman brain, lizard brain, whatever you want to call it, there's all kinds of names for it. We are dysregulated and we're focused fully on our emotions. And so this hand-brain model kind of helps us understand where we are and how we are responding to a stressful situation. We can either be regulated and in control, or dysregulated and feeling kind of out of control with our emotions. So when we take it a step further, this is our comfort zone. This is where we're regulated, we're calm, we're settled, we're connected, we're comfortable, right? This is where we want to be. But when we start to get a little bit dysregulated and it's starting to rev up a little bit, those neurotransmitters are starting to misfire, it's starting to get a little foggy, and we're a little dysregulated. This is kind of like alert zone, right? It's like the warning sign. You're noticing that, you know what, I'm feeling a little bit distressed. My window of tolerance, I'm outside of that window of tolerance with my emotions. And you're kind of starting to focus like, okay, you're trying to be rational, but you're not really fully rational at that moment. And then we flip our lid. This is that activation or danger zone. That's when the caveman brain or the survival brain starts to kick in, and we're in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode. And just as a quick little rundown, fight is obviously, we know what that means, right? We're going to fight. We're going to be more aggressive. Flight, we're going to get out of there, right? We're going to get out of that cave. We're going to be that caveman that runs away from that saber-tooth tiger to try to survive. Freeze is a little more dangerous, right? But we just freeze in that moment. Maybe we're stuck. But fawn is a really interesting one that I want to explain too when we're in this dysregulated state of our brain. And fawn is when we're actually trying to people please. We try to basically like win people over. And you might see your children do this as well, because I've noticed that it's more frequent lately in people's stress response. But they're going to go out of their way to make sure that you're okay with them and that you're not mad at them, that kind of thing. And so they're going to be overly kind of people pleasing in a way. So when we're in that danger zone, we're probably going to have one of those responses to basically like protect ourselves, coping mechanisms, survival instincts, that kind of thing. Then we can take it one step further and like those fingers are gone, right? And this is like when it's a chronic threat, it's unbearable, we're completely shut down. You might see kids kind of huddled away, withdrawn, that kind of thing. It's completely dissociated from rational thought at that moment. So those are kind of the stages of regulation. So we see our kids in emotional meltdowns sometimes. And that's because of their brain being completely unregulated or starting to become unregulated. So what's important to understand is that this is a brain response. This is not necessarily, sometimes it can be a behavior thing, but typically it's because it's happening in their brain. It's somewhat uncontrollable. And so we will talk later about strategies and things like that, but we have to know that when they're here and they are in that brainstem or that amygdala and they're in stress response, just as adults, we're all the same. It's kind of all the same response. All we know and all we can tell at that moment is that we're mad or we're frustrated or we're sad or we're scared or whatever that feeling and that emotion is that is taking over. discipline's not going to work. Normal discipline, normal conversation is not going to happen. It can't happen here because it has to happen here. So just keep that in mind when you're approaching your child when they are in that unregulated brain response. And just know it's not personal. It's not that they're just trying to misbehave or take it out on people or anything like that. They're in that state of mind. And it's once you kind of understand that and teach that to them too, it's a little bit easier to kind of work through those situations with them. So that's your brain.
All right. I get to talk about emotional age versus chronological age, because we see this a lot with our kids. If you see the picture, it'll say he looks 16, but he acts 5. And they're like, oh, he's actually 17, but he acts like he's 4. So a lot of the times our kids' chronological age will not match with their emotional age. And kids get stuck at an emotional age when they experience some sort of traumatic experience or some trauma. And so just know that if the trauma was experienced, let's say at age 6, then you will see your child's behavior mimic that of a 6-year-old. And so you have to ask yourself, has there been some traumatic event? Has there been something that has changed my child's everyday normal routines, the things that has really affected their lives at a younger age? Because that would explain why sometimes when you're trying to talk to them or you're saying, hey, you're too old for that. I know you got to get that. Why are you acting like you don't have that together? Like, why are you acting like you're 5? Sometimes you need to go back and look at, did something happen at the age of 5 that they perceived as traumatic and they get stuck at that emotional age? And so if you notice that your child is chronically going back to not acting their age, as we say, then think of the things that they have experienced growing up. Is there something that happened that changed their everyday routines, something that they would perceive as traumatic? Because people can get stuck at whatever that emotional age is at that time. So that is just something else to consider when you are dealing with your kids and you're seeing things over and over and over again. Ask yourself, did they get stuck at an emotional age where a traumatic experience or situation occurred? Now, this is our favorite thing. We all get to work with adolescents every day. And so adolescence spans from the age of 10 to 19. And so that will be like your junior high, like 5th grade, going into junior high and in high school. So those are these kiddos. And so we get them, we're like, oh my gosh, they got the attitude, we don't know who they are, like they start to change, they start to explore more themselves, want to become more independent. And that is absolutely normal. The adolescent brain at that time is rewiring at that time. And so what that means that they're pruning old neural networks, as it says, but they're developing new ones. And so at this age, that's when more information and things can be taught, like empathy and friendships, healthy relationships, boundaries. All of those things can be taught during adolescence because their brain are developing new neural networks and making newer connections. During this time, parents, the bonding and attachment to their peers are most important. So they are truly worried about what their friends think about them. Like that bonding and attachment to you, where they were looking for your approval and looking to make sure that they were doing everything in their power to make sure like their grades, and I want my mom to be proud of this, that shifts. Their friendships become very, very important. So during this time, we need to teach them, like, what are healthy relationships? What do healthy friendships look like? With us working on middle school campuses, you guys will know your kids probably come home and one day, like, they're friends with somebody, and then they're like, they come home and I absolutely hate them. I hate them. I can't stand them. They're the worst person in the world. And they go back to school, and then they make up and they're friends the next day. And you're like, I swore you came home and told me that you absolutely hated this individual. You guys are not friends. But that's because they're trying to understand what healthy relationships are. They're trying to find their way in friendships. So having these conversations during adolescence is very crucial to them being able to understand what a secure bond and attachment to their peers looks like. Self-construction, this is the big one. They want to be independent, but not really. Like they want to be independent and be able to do things, but they still need your guidance. So it's like they know everything and nothing at all. So you can't tell them anything. It's like, I know all of this. I know, but they're still looking for that support and guidance from us. So parents, we have to learn how to show up and guide our kids without taking over. That mistakes during this time are okay. Risks during this time are okay, as long as they're healthy and they still have your support and guidance there. So we don't want to shield them from everything. We want to encourage independence during this time. And as we know, the fourth bullet is your social media, your bullying addictions. They all impact the process. So we'll talk a little bit more about tips and things about things that you can do for your teens and for your kids during this age, because really social media, bullying, presentation of drugs, all of those things can impact their growth during this time. And as Shannon stated at the very beginning, our external environment really influences our emotions and how we develop, and especially during adolescence. If the external environment gives them messages that they're less than or separate from, then that's when you see more of your extreme emotional unregulated brains, because their belonging and connectedness at this age is crucial. They want to feel like they belong somewhere and they want to feel connected. And if that is severed, then you see your kids either being more withdrawn, like Heather talked about your 4 different things, your fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. You either see kids that are entirely withdrawn, and that can be your freeze. You can see the kids that are overly aggressive, but these are all protective measures. So if somebody comes to me, I'm very defensive. I'm jumping to this. I'm really doing a lot of those things. She said, like, you're fawn. You just want to be liked. So you're doing any and everything. So you're not really having a clear sense of yourself. You're just doing whatever your peers ask you. Yes, I'll do this. So you go along with this. And so we see a lot of that during that time as well. So your fight, flight, freeze, or your fawn. Anytime that external environment makes them feel like they're not enough, then you start to see them rely on these 4 areas of the brain. And so, when they're doing that, it's from an unintegrated and unregulated brain. So what we want you guys to understand is that we do not want to take away the consequences that you have for your kids. They have to have structure and consequences, boundaries. They have to know what all of that is. What we want you to evaluate is your approach. How do you approach your child when they're going through a situation that they feel causes them to be unregulated? And so how do we approach them? Do we meet them with that same tension? Do we meet them at that same level that they're at? Because if so, then that's why you find yourself constantly bumping heads with your kids, because neither one of you can hear each other if your brains are unintegrated and unregulated. Both of you are coming off of emotion. And so the only way you can have a logical conversation with your kids and you guys understand each other is when you are talking from that prefrontal cortex and that regulated brain. So don't think that we're saying take away consequences. No, they have to have consequences. That's the natural order of life. There are consequences for behaviors. But we want you to think about, how am I approaching my kid during this time, and what changes can I tweak so that our communication in our relationship is better. All right, so we're going to get into some of the techniques and some of the things that you can try with your kids. And this is we're going to go from younger to older. The first one is water. Water is so simple, just a cold bottle or glass of water. So if you find that your kid is responding from the unintegrated, unregulated brain, you can say, stop for a second, walk, go get you a drink of water. So what water does, it metabolizes cortisol, which is very high during the times when they're super, super stressful. So when they're overwhelmed, that cortisol level goes swoosh up through the roof. What water does is it metabolizes that and it brings it back down. The way you can tell if your kid is regulating or at a point where you can talk with them is after they drink a glass of water, you will see their shoulders fall back and relax. So looking at their body language, their shoulders falling back and relaxing. For younger kids, we like to do a lot of books. So if you read with your kids, there are a lot of books that talk about regulation techniques, and you can put it into your everyday routine. They can start reading the book to you. You can do it at bedtime. So a good one is the Gorilla Thumps book. And why? So it takes them through like different little tapping things that they can do to help themselves regulate their brain, and they can practice this. Another easy one is look up. Now, we talk a lot about the brain. One thing about the brain is that it cannot be in two parts of the brain at the same time. Just like we were talking about, you can't be an angry and compassionate person at the same time. The brain has three different levels of which it can respond. So when you are looking up, you are accessing the visual part of your brain. When you are looking directly at someone, you are accessing the auditory part of your brain. And then when you're looking down, that's the emotional part of your brain. So you can always tell where your kids are based off where their eyes are. So think about any individual that you see and they're crying. Normally we'll see if they're crying, they put their head down, they put their eyes down, and their head and their eyes are closer to their heart. So anytime your head and your eyes are closer to your heart, your brain thinks that that is an emotion that you want to feel more of. So it amps it up. So when people put their heads down and they're like, oh, I'm going to stop crying. Oh, no, your brain is like, oh, it's closer to your heart. You like this. Let me amp this up for you. And so you see they cry more. They may sob harder. And so normally when kids' eyes or heads down, they're in that emotional part of their brain. And most likely it's negative self-talk at that time. So you want to be aware of where your kids' eyes and heads are. If they come in from a long day and their heads are down and whatever else, just know they're in that emotional part of your brain, of their brain. And you may want to say, hey, I see that you look a little down. Is there something you want to talk about? Because you can already tell that there's something that had been overwhelming for them that day. If they're looking straight at you when they're talking, whatever else, then they're accessing their auditory part and they're talking. And the way that look up works is that if you notice that your kid is coming in and their head is down and they're accessing that emotional part of the brain, you can have them look up at the lights. You can have them look up at the ceilings and say, hey, can you spell out a word up there? Spell out spinach. And they have them SPIN and spell out the word. What it does is disengages that emotional part of the brain and it makes them tap into the visual part of the brain. And so then they won't even remember what that emotion was. It's that quick. So it's really taking the time to know just different little small techniques that you can utilize that'll have them regulate and get back to that prefrontal cortex or that regulated part of the brain so that you're able to have a conversation with them. Another one are breathing techniques. Up here at the top, you'll see breathing shapes. And so just figure 8 breathing, teaching them how to breathe in and out, in and out. So you guys practicing that together and telling them, okay, I can see right now that you're getting a little upset. I want you to take a couple deep breaths in, or tell them like cookie breathing. I tell my kids, act like you're smelling a warm batch of just freshly baked cookies. Breathe in and then breathe it out. So just teaching kids little techniques like that will help them to regulate their brain. Pat your heart and stomach. That's another one. So you're patting your heart and your stomach at the same time. So that gets your brain to kind of think of doing 2 things at once, and it disconnects from that emotional part of your brain. That simplified EMDR technique is just another little tapping tool. If your kids have a hard time concentrating when they're doing homework and they're like, oh, I need to listen to music or I need these things on YouTube, and you're scared that they're going to get to something else, the kaleidoscope videos are really, really good. And so you can have them put this on, and it is another thing that has them tap into that visual part of their brain to lower that cortisol level again so that they're able to concentrate on the task at hand. And so just little videos like this, and then the regulation breathing stop and think are actually Sesame Street videos. So if you have younger children, you can go on sesamestreet.com, and they have a lot of regulation videos, a lot of things that you guys can do together, and it's songs. So we know our younger kids like to sing and dance. So if you have elementary level, it puts it into a song. It's like, learn how to breathe, just little stuff like that, that you guys can do together in short videos that you can put on in the house that they can practice, and they won't even know. They're so busy singing and dancing and doing those little things that they don't even realize that it is a technique that they're learning how to stop and do. The words are teaching them, like when you're angry, stop and take a breath. And so if they hear it a lot when they get in class and they're like, oh, Elmo was like, oh, when he was angry, he stopped to take a breath, and they start to try those things. So incorporating just the little Sesame Street videos or other little things into your daily routine and practicing those with your kids help them learn how to calm themselves when they need to regulate. And that's what these calming techniques are. These are for you to teach your kid how to regulate themselves without you having to do it for them, how to regulate themselves without you having to take them out and be, oh, breathe and whatever else. We want our kids to be able to do these things for themselves. So being able to teach these things or show them these things when they're in those having those big emotional outbursts, it teaches them, I can do this on my own. And then they'll utilize it in other areas, not only at home, at school. And these are things they can utilize throughout the duration of their lives. Even when they become adults, they know how to regulate their brain, how to regulate their emotions. And it makes them just feel better as adults, more confident, more successful in things when I know how to regulate myself.
And last but not least, some other tools that you can use. When you're speaking to your kids, be sure that you're commenting on the action and not necessarily them as a person. So this would sound like, when you were yelling at your brother, you were being too aggressive, not like you always being mean. This allows them to understand that my behavior is not appropriate right now. My behavior is what you don't like, and not you don't like me. Again, a lot of times the emotional poverty comes from poor developed inner selves, how I view me. And if I view my parent or my caregiver as the one not liking me, that can have detrimental effects. So we want to be sure to comment on their behavior and not associate it with them as a person. So like you don't want to call them lazy and those kind of things, the name calling. What is the behavior that they're displaying for you that you would like to see improve? 2, it's huge. Validate their emotions. Validating their emotions does not mean you agree with their perception. It does not mean that you think they should feel that way. It's saying what you're feeling right now is true for you, and that's it. And that's all you can say to them. You know what? I can understand why you would feel that way right now. It doesn't matter if you don't agree with why they feel that. You're just validating that you are entitled to the emotions that you have. As parents, we sometimes are quick to try to explain away what they're feeling because we know like, oh, that doesn't really make sense. Oh, y'all gonna be friends tomorrow, and kind of blow it off. But for them in those moments, it's very real. And so allowing them an opportunity to process those harder emotions helps them learn how to regulate when you are not present, which leads to number 3, the Q-tip. We're taking it personal. We all know the adolescent age is something memorable. And a lot of times it's like they're reacting. Well, that's because that is where their brain is at. The prefrontal cortex that they talked about earlier doesn't start developing until we're about the age of 7. So if you have a little one who seems like they're having a hard time regulating, well, that's because the part of the brain that communicates like, oh, this happened, and that's why you're feeling this. That part isn't even developed yet, and it starts at about age 7. Well, your emotional brain is fully formed and fully developed at the time that you are born. So this is why we speak in emotions way quicker than we can speak in thoughts and words to others and to ourselves. So a lot of the behaviors that are displayed are not personally because of us, but it's because of our private self-talk and our private emotions that we're experiencing on the inside that we can't necessarily communicate. This is what's going on inside of me. So it's not always a personal attack back to you. when you're speaking to your kids, before they even start, ask them, do they want comfort or do they want solutions or both? So that way you'll know what you're listening for. Do they just want a hug at the end, like, yeah, today was a hard day? Or do they want to help problem solve? We can't solve all their problems for them, and we can't protect them from every hard situation. We want them to be able to problem solve on their own and, again, regulate for themselves. So it's okay to ask them, hey, would you like comfort right now, or would you like a solution? Or do you want a little bit of both? Number 5, allow them to make mistakes. We're there to guard them. We're there to protect them. We're there to be their safety net. We're going to do that regardless. But they have to feel what happened so that they can start to build those bridges and make those connections to their actions, their behaviors, their emotions, their thoughts. So allow them to make mistakes and be ready to support them through it. And then halt. Try to avoid tough and difficult conversations when you yourself or your child is hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Our cortisol levels are heightened. That's the stress hormone. And we don't really want to deal with whatever's going on, especially not something challenging. Oh, halt if you are feeling hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Wait, regroup, and then come back later. Recognize that we as individuals have our own hopes, dreams, and expectations for us and for our kids. And our kids will have their own hopes, dreams, and expectations, and sometimes they don't align. And so while they're moving to the beat of their own drum, I'm trying to get you back on beat with me so that we can sound like one uniform sound, when in actuality, they're trying to come up with their own sound. Give them space for their hopes, dreams, and expectations. Hear them out. Listen to them. And then number 8, kids learn by watching. So how do you respond to your stress? Do you close yourself in the room? Do you take time away from everyone else? Do you find yourself frustrated and yelling more? Do you find yourself eating? Kids learn by watching. So how they're responding to their stress, chances are high they've either seen you or someone else in their environment, whether it's other kids, other parents, other adults. They learn by watching. So be mindful of how you are displaying how to handle stress. When they see you taking care of yourselves when you're stressed, they will too learn, like, oh, this is what I can do. They learn way more than we actually give them credit for, just by watching. So we are coming down to the end of it. If you enjoyed or have more questions about emotional poverty, we actually got all of the information from Ruby Payne's book, Emotional Poverty in All Demographics. And if you need more information about your child or support, feel free to contact your campus counselor or an SEL counselor. And now we're going to open it up. Feel free to unmute yourself, raise your hand, or type a question in the chat if you have a specific question for us. We're going to stop the recording period just for the sake of privacy. And thank you all for attending.